if anyone is downstairs hoping to join us, maybe they'll just hear me. Doctor, my friends, the guy said, "Doctor, my friends think I'm crazy, but I'm not. It's just I've come to realize I'm not really a person, I'm a moth." And the doctor said, "But this sounds like something you should bring to a psychiatrist. I'm a dentist. Why'd you come to my office?" The guy said, "Because your light was on." I don't know, I really love that one, but you know, people tell me it just doesn't work. I don't know. All right. So we have been looking at some of the spirituality and the beliefs of Midwestern Native American tribes. And today we're going to be looking at the biggest festival, the biggest ritual of the year, which we know as the Sundance, although to call it the Sundance is a little bit misleading because it's not a dance where you're trying to communicate with the sun as if the sun were a god. It's actually a dance in which you are trying to communicate with all of the great spirit forces of the world. And part of the way that you do this, part of the way that you focus on this spirit energy is by kind of temporarily blinding yourself by staring at the sun while you're dancing. So we call it the sun dance, but a better translation would be the dance while staring at the sun. There's no single definitive report of it, and there's no script or prayer book, because on the one hand, elements of this ritual, when we think about this ritual, this was practiced for centuries by about 20 different tribes in the Midwest. And they all did it a little bit different, but every report that we find has certain things in common. But there's no script to it because all of the words and all of the songs had to be spontaneous. It had to be something where, you know, the belief was that, first of all, these were cultures that did not write things down. But second, even if they could, the belief was that the spirits would prove that they were there by inspiring, by kind of putting new words and new songs into people. So we can try to study it as a ritual, but it's not something where we can say, like, you have to do exactly these things and say exactly these words in this order. So we're going to look at elements from a couple of different reports because we've been, oh, this isn't showing pictures at all. Oh, okay. All right. I have been, okay, now I see. I have been showing pictures. So, I know, and like I said, my laptop's going through this unhappy thing, but I do think it's going to find itself. You can do that, right? There we go. Okay. All right. Good. This is what would show when I say there is no script to the Sundance, is a page of a screenplay. So we've been looking in this series at Black Elk and the personal recollections of Oglala Lakota holy man Black Elk. But in today's lesson, we'll also be incorporating some quotes from other people, and these are people who have participated in it. The ceremony, we find, always took place in midsummer. And it was this big gathering, and everybody who participated in this ritual was expected, you know, to be one of the dancers or one of the participants in the ritual. It was this tremendous honor. And the way that you accepted this honor was by giving things away, was by just giving away your possessions. Black Elk remembers a Sundance from when he was a child, and the Sundance was led by Sitting Bull, who was the greatest medicine man of the nation at the time. Sitting Bull is most familiar to us from the Battle of Little Bighorn, or Custer's Last Stand, in which it was the medicine person, Sitting Bull, who went around, and all of these different tribes of the Midwest who just couldn't stand each other, but they all respected this guy, and they respected him because he was this great healer, this great medicine person, this great spiritual leader. So we encounter Sitting Bull as a warrior, which is ironic because Sitting Bull was not at the Battle of Little Bighorn, but we think of him as like this great warrior. But really the reason that he was chosen to be, to kind of gather everybody together, was that he was this spiritual leader. Black Elk says that the dance was always performed in the moon of fatness, which we would call June. But for them, their name for June was essentially the month of pregnancy, or the month of conception. It was the month in which the bison would all get together. So this is really interesting. I think, you know, bison are matrilineal, naturally. They travel in herds where it is like a grandmother bison, her female descendants, and then their calves, their children. And then male bison tend to travel in separate herds. But in June, they all get together and they have their bison mating season. And so just like there was this big bison, these big bison reunions going on, the Plains Indians, who also traveled in matrilineal groups, where if we were, you know, if we were going among the Lakota, for example, it wouldn't be just one village. It would be multiple moving villages, and each village would be organized around, like, these are like the 5 grandmothers of this village, and then here are their female descendants and their, like, husbands and unmarried men. So the tribes, they would also have these big reunions in the middle of summer. Sometimes these could be as many as 12,000 people who lived all year in these little villages, say like 500 people in a village. And now it's June, and like 24 villages are all going to get together, and there could be 12,000 people. And something really interesting about the Sundance ritual, which was not just a dance, as we'll see, it was like this big week-long festival, but nobody had a house and nobody had a storage locker. These were all people who brought everything they owned with them wherever they went, and the entire village was movable. So when the people gathered for the Sundance festival, everybody brought everything they owned. And as I said in one of our past sessions, they had it was called the pony drag, but this was like their U-Haul, was you would tie 2 like TP posts across the back of a horse, and you could put like a couple 100 pounds of stuff on that. So when everybody gathers for the Sundance, and everyone has brought everything they own, the medicine people are watching the families come in and saying, this family owns a lot of material stuff, and this family owns very little. And then what they'll do is they'll say, you who have been very prosperous, you get to host one of the big parties, or you get to, you know, tell a story, or you get to do a part of the ritual. But when you do it, you have to prove how great you are by giving a bunch of your stuff away. And so when you showed up for the festival, everybody brought everything they owned, but when they left, it was kind of evened out, because the people who showed up with a lot ended up having to give a lot away, mainly to the people who showed up with very little. The Sundance takes place in the center of the universe, and the center of the universe is never in the same place twice. But the way they find it for that year is that the medicine people of all of these villages, let's say we're talking about like 24 villages, so 24 medicine people would gather, and they would sit together, and they would smoke a pipe, and then they would all wander off. And they would regather the next day, each one of them having found some sacred spot. And then the group of medicine people would go to each one of these spots. And they were looking for that spot where they all got this particular feeling. Now, the spot always had to be by a river, because if you're going to bring 12,000 people and all of their horses, you need water nearby. The spot had to have a certain kind of tree growing, which was going to be necessary for the ritual. But basically, all of these medicine people had to agree. They had to say, yes, we feel it, that this year, the center of the universe is right here. And then, once they found it, they would sit down and they would smoke their pipe, and they would be very serious there. And then they would tell dirty jokes, and they would try to make each other laugh. And so it had to be a spot, number one, where you felt this very serious spiritual energy, and number two, a spot where your dirty jokes were really funny, because the ritual was going to need to contain kind of both of these energies, like a serious ritual energy, but also a very like playful energy. They were smoking, now this, in the Midwest, there were certain tree barks, like red willow bark. There was probably some tobacco, and this is what the natives call Indian tobacco, which is green. And it is tobacco. It's not like, like wacky tobacco, but it's a lot more powerful than the strain of tobacco that like R.J. Reynolds uses, because like American tobacco companies need to produce a tobacco that you can seal up in plastic and that it'll still be good a year from now. Whereas this Indian tobacco, you had to find it, and you dried it and smoked it, but it was apparently very strong, and it could give you mild, very, very mild hallucinations. Yeah. So they find the spot, and then they all go back to their tribes, and they gather everybody together. They say, in this part of the month of fatness, we're all going to gather at this spot. And everybody gathers. And one of the elements that this spot needs to have is a certain kind of tree that has a natural fork in it, because that's going to be important for the ritual. And they are going to identify a tree. When the tree has been chosen, all of these young people are going to put flowers in their hair, and they're going to come singing and dancing around the tree. And then all of the pregnant women of the tribe are going to do a special dance around the tree, and they're really going to try to put all of their reproductive energy into the tree. And then some warrior, some celebrity warrior who had done some great deed on the battlefield that year, he gets to stand under the tree and tell his story of this is here's my story of this thing you've all heard about, and this was how I, whatever. But before he stands under the tree, he needs to prove how brave he is by giving away everything that he owns. So first he's got to give away all of his horses and all of his stuff. And the more brave he is, the more stuff he gives away. And that's how people know, oh, this is the toughest guy, because he's going to, in order to tell his story, he's going to walk out of here with nothing. And then he gets to, at the end of his story, he gets to hit the tree with a ceremonial stick. And this is when Midwestern warriors rode into battle, most people brought weapons, but there were also people who rode into battle unarmed with just a ceremonial stick. And if someone from the opposing side died on the battlefield, this unarmed person had to ride up and touch them with the stick. And this was part of their like battle spirituality. But it tended to be the bravest person in the tribe. That's the person that you had to choose and say, everybody else is riding into this battle with bows and spears and hatchets. You need to ride into the battle with no weapon. And you can get killed and you can get hurt just like anybody else, but you just get the stick. But now he gets to touch the tree with the stick, and this is another sign of his courage. But it's also the sign that the tree is respected as if it were a fallen warrior, because they are going to cut the tree. Here's an interesting thing about the sun dance, and every tribe did it different, but in some tribes, the first cut on the tree had to be made by a two-spirit person, a person who was anatomically male, but identified and dressed as a female. In some cultures, you know, a trans person is somebody who is feared because they're on neither side of the border between genders. But in some of these cultures, you actually needed a trans person. They had this, it's like, when we think about the tree, it absorbs the energy of the pregnant women, it absorbs the energy of the great warrior. That is male energy, female energy, but it also needs this energy from a person who is both and neither. So it also needs contact in order to become sacred in this way. Once the trans person has made the first cut in the tree, then a bunch of maidens. Now the medicine people have gone around and they've picked out like the most eligible and virtuous maidens in the tribes. And they've said, you group of marriageable girls, you can have the special honor of cutting down the tree together. And while you do, your uncles are going to tell stories, and then your fathers are going to throw big parties for you, and they're going to feed everybody. So if you can think of like a debutante party or a quinceañera party, or like a party where you get everybody together and say like, hey, if you're going to, you know, marry a girl this year, here's this girl and she's really special. That was another special thing that happened at the Sundance. And they got to chop down the tree together, but then their fathers and uncles were also expected to just give away a whole bunch of stuff in order to celebrate. When the tree is cut down, the chieftains of the village, they get together, they carry the tree back to the sacred site. Now, some of the elders are digging this pit that you're going to use to stand up the tree, to get it to stand in the middle of the circle. But before you stand the tree up, they play this game, and this was, among the Midwestern tribes, this was their favorite game. It's a game called throwing them off their horses. And what you do is, you get all of the teenage boys, like all of the warriors in the tribe, and they're in this big circle on horseback, facing the center, facing the spot where the tree is going to stand. And at a signal, they all ride in toward the center, trying to push each other off of their horses. And whoever can be the first to touch the spot on the ground in the center of the circle, that person, it is said, is like, you know, the courageous warrior who can't get hurt that year. So now everybody's doing this. It's like a battle, but everybody rides in unarmed. But here we should remember, when I say this was their favorite game, this was like their version of football, I mean, or lacrosse, or, you know, but the teenagers who were doing this had been trained on horseback from like the age of 5. And these were like real stunt riders who, who also were trained to ride a horse at full gallop into the middle of a bison stampede, and trained to fall off a horse and get right back on. But they played this really dangerous game. But this was another thing at the Sundance. We're going to see this mix of energies. And one of the things that these people really value is courage and battle. When the tree is finally stood up, so now they've dug a hole, they've kind of pounded down the ground with this horseback game. They stand up the tree, and the next thing that happens is that women who've given birth in the last year bring their babies to the base of this tree, and the babies get their ears pierced. And this is kind of like the equivalent of like a baptism ceremony. This is when you welcome that baby into the community. And it's important to do it at this time because one of the things that's going to happen at this big festival is that people from different villages, remember, you're kind of related to everybody in your village. So people from different villages are going to get married. And when they do, the groom has to join his wife's tribe, his wife's village. He leaves his family and joins her side. And then he might not see his parents and his relatives until the next Sundance. So the idea is when the baby gets their ears pierced, you want both sides of the family there, even if they come from these different villages. The belief is that the piercing of the ears, which I know some people today do that with, like newborn babies, and it just seems barbaric to me. But the piercing, they believe that it kind of opens the person's ears to the spirits. And you also, you get your baby's ears pierced by some kind of celebrity warrior or medicine person. And they'll pierce your baby's ears, and then they'll whisper some secret to your baby. So, like you could get like Sitting Bull himself, everybody's favorite medicine person, to like personally pierce your baby's ears. He would whisper something to your baby that was for nobody else. And then this would give your baby some, special thing. So what I've done here is, these are the things that we've seen so far. And, here in red, these are like, like women's jobs. Here in blue are men's jobs. Then here in purple is a trans person. And what I think is really fascinating about this is that before the dance even begins, it's not just a dance that is done by a handful of athletes. It's something that you cannot do without men and women and a trans person and the elders and the babies and like everybody. It's like everybody in the village, regardless of age or gender, is needed for some part of this, because what they want to do is they want to make this tree like a lightning rod for sacred energy. They want the tree itself to be as energized, as powerful as possible. And they want this circle of ground, the center of the universe that they have found. They want for this circle of ground to be as energized as possible. So they do all these things, and everybody, regardless of whether you're an elder or a baby, like no matter who you are, there is something special that you can bring to it. And the next step in setting up is that while this stuff has been going on, the grandmothers have been watching the children. They've been babysitting all of these hundreds of children. And then a grandmother is going to put on the hide of a bison, of a grandmother bison. And one of the grandfathers is going to put on a bison hide as well. And they're going to lead the children who are pretending to be buffalo. And they're going to lead them, and they're going to do a stampede in a circle in the circle around this tree, which is going to smooth out the ground, because once the dance begins, the circle needs to be completely smooth for the dancers. But it's also, here again, it's going to bring this other kind of energy, a sort of playful energy, but also the spirit of the bison. So here we go. When I think about all of this, like dancing in circles around a tree that's been cut down and stood up somewhere, there actually are some fascinating parallels with the maypole dance, which was a big thing in like pagan Northern Europe, of dancing in a circle around this tree that you would cut down and brought to the center of the village. I said before that when you selected the sacred tree, you needed a tree that was forked at the top. And the reason is that you're going to hang these two things from the top of the tree. One, and they can be made of wood or a hardened leather. But one of them is going to be a red statue of a human, and one of them is going to be a little black statue of a bison. And the tree itself is kind of like a scale. It needs to show that there is a balance between the humans and the bison in this area. Now the dancers, and when I say dancers, the people who perform the sun dance, it is technically a dance, but really what we're talking about here are like the great athletes of these tribes. And while all this stuff has been going on to prepare the site, the people who are actually going to be performing the dance have been in a sweat lodge, and they've been kind of steaming, purifying, fasting, and meditating. And now they emerge. So now we've got these, if you can imagine like the star athletes on a baseball team, or like the star athletes on a football team, like you've got like the people you would send to the Olympics. But now these people emerge. They have been in this lodge, in this sauna, without food for several days. And they come out, and behind each one, like from straps around their shoulders, they are dragging bison skulls, and the skulls kind of represent, this is the animal that has to die in order for the people to live. But this person is a great hunter and is one of the people who kills them, and so he kind of has this following him. Dragging bison skulls from 1 to 7 skulls, if you can imagine this, your average bison skull weighs 25 pounds, and it has these horns that, as the thing is bouncing along behind you, the horns will just hook into the ground. And you still have to keep moving. You still have to drag this. So some of these athletes are dragging, 200 pounds of skulls behind them, and the skulls all have these sharp hooks that are trying to dig into the ground. People are playing this rhythm on the drum, and this is a communal rhythm. This is a single drum, and the drum itself is made of a combination of a hollowed tree trunk and the leather of a bison hide. So the trunk is a combination of plant and animal. And everybody who plays it is playing it in unison. Each drummer has one stick, and they all just join in with this unison drumming. Meanwhile, the children have another special job, which is that here are all of these people, and they're dressed in their finest clothes, and the children are told to run around and throw mud balls at them, and try to stick them with sharp sticks. And if they see somebody carrying like a bag of water, they have to try to puncture the bag so that it spills, and the person has to go back and do it again. So the children's job in the sun dance is to kind of make mischief and just make it harder for everyone, which makes sense to me because, you know, in some religions, you bring the children and you try to sit them down and say, like, look, here you have to pretend to be 80. Like, you know, just sit here. In this religion, it's like, no, children are children. They're going to do this stuff anyway. And what they're going to do kind of with their pranks is they're going to add a spontaneity to this thing. They're going to add just, you know, like you know, it's part of the ritual. It's part of the test. It's part of the trial, that whatever you're doing is harder because children are running around trying to like jab you with a sharp stick, you know, while you're doing it. So now I should say here, this is a culture where children are children until one day the medicine person walks up to a 13-year-old, you know, 14-year-old, at whatever age, the medicine person just walks up and says, you're coming with me. You're going to go sit on that mountain for 3 days, and when you come down, your childhood is over. And at that point, that kid who was like chasing people around last year, throwing mud balls and trying to stick people with sharp sticks, now that person is an adult, and they are being chased around with mud balls and poked with sharp sticks. So the children are making mischief, but they also know, like, it could be next year, it could be the year after, but at some point that's going to be me. I'm going to have to be an adult in this thing. Okay. Now the dancers have come to the central pole. Bison leather ropes have already been attached to the top. And now you're going to attach the dancer to the pole. And that might be done by, you know, by like tying them, or in some cases it is done by putting hooks into the person's skin to attach them to this pole. And the way that the dance works is that the dancer is going to stare at the sun, and they can do this for days. They're going to dance toward the pole and away from the pole. They've got an eagle bone whistle in their mouth. They're not allowed to speak, but they can make any sound they want on this whistle. And they're going to keep dancing inward and outward. And when they reach the point where they can dance no more, and again, by this point, this is a person who like hasn't eaten in a week, and now they're like doing this dance. You dance up to the pole, you sprint backwards, you take a running leap, and you try to either snap the rope, or if you've got hooks, you try to pull the hooks out of yourself. And the idea is, that the belief is that everything in the universe is moving. Everything in the universe is always moving. And it's moving in circles and cycles and predictable ways. But the belief is that in the course of a year, the world gets a little bit tilted on its axis. And if the world tilts too far, the grasses won't grow, and the bison won't eat, and the people will starve. So the belief is that once a year, you have to put this stake into the center of the world, the Sundance tree. And then you kind of gently massage it by walking backwards and forwards and kind of pulling it, you know, pulling lightly against it. And then you run backwards, you leap, and you give it one last pull. And the belief is that this is what kind of readjusts the world on the universal axis. So when a person does this, the belief is that like the people who do this really like save the world, that everything would kind of spin out into disorder and destruction if the world was not kind of readjusted, reset once a year. So the Sundance, if you can imagine something that combines like an Easter service with the Super Bowl, like it is both of these things. And the people who we refer to as the dancers, but really they are more like the great athletes. This is this show of athleticism, but it's also the way in which the world is saved for the next year. And of course, it's also the time when, like I said, because you live in a village where everybody is kind of related through like 3 or 4 village grandmothers. This is also the time when you can look good, when you can try to be like the star dancer, and then somebody has thrown this kind of debutante party for this like virtuous maiden, and so there's kind of a lot of matchmaking that goes on there. And at the end of the dance, they say, you know, every year at the end of the dance, there are some like wedding ceremonies, and there are some people who leave the dance in a different village from the one that they grew up in. There are young guys who get married and move in with their wives and, you know, and their wife's family. So yes, it's also a way of maintaining the health of the community and making sure that people aren't gonna keep kind of interbreeding within the same village. Good. All right. So I know this is a lot. Do we have any questions about this? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good question. And I mean, anybody, right, this is a good question. Did they think of the world being round in the way that we think of it? That I can't say, and it didn't, but they did know that everything moves in circles. The time moves in circles, seasons move in circles. And so whether or not they thought of the world as the earth as a circle, that I don't know, but definitely there was this idea that like there's all of these circles that are always moving, and that you needed to kind of readjust. Everything in the universe is moving all the time. Even the stars, they don't appear to move to us. Right. To be in one place. But yeah. When billions of years go by, those stars change positions because they're all spread out. Huh. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, and like anybody could come up with the idea of a round Earth if they just thought about, you know, that the shape of the moon was determined by the shadow of the Earth. But apparently this isn't something that occurred to a lot of people. But yeah, no, that is a good question. Yeah, yeah. But all right, so yeah, so for our next session, we're going to continue with a medicine person, kind of sharing his story about how he discovered being a medicine person, and then how he learned how to heal people. So, thank you, and we'll continue. Matter of fact, I think our next session is going to be like 2 weeks from now, because this is one of those 5th Sundays. So I'll be back the 2nd Sunday in April. Good. Well, thank you.